Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cutting Through the Fog, What is Private Cloud and What Role Does It Play in the Broader IT Market, which will review high-level findings from our private cloud and professional cloud services benchmark, as well as our private cloud customer research and the cloud components benchmark. I'm Allison Crawford, and I'll be your host for today's session. While some vendors found themselves unprepared for the first wave of public cloud adoption, they can now catch up with the market through the solutions and purchasing processes offered through private cloud. Private cloud offers the benefits of cloud without customers needing to shift all the responsibility of delivery to an external firm. As a result, budgets for adoption of private cloud are increasing, driving a market opportunity increasingly on par with the more mature public cloud space. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll delve into the drivers of this business model, followed by Q&A of this trend and what it means for your business. Before Alan gets started, I'd like to cover some housekeeping items with you. First, we're recording today's session and posting on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments through the Q&A or chat function. Alan will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to either of us at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/tbr_market_insight. And at the end of the presentation, we'll share all the social media links with you again. Now let me introduce Principal Analyst Alan Krantz from our Software and Cloud Practice. As the Cloud Practice Manager, Alan leads TBR's coverage of the technologies and business models that play across the cloud computing landscape. This coverage of cloud includes a holistic perspective on all types of cloud delivery, public, private, and hybrid, and the opportunities surrounding both delivering and enabling cloud services for customers. Alan's background includes analyzing the business models of leading IT providers such as Microsoft, EMC, and IBM for more than 10 years. And with that, let me hand this over to Alan.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. So first, as we look at this overall topic, one of the things we want to cover is how do we look at private cloud from within TBR. And our coverage of private cloud includes a number of different workloads, delivery methods. The common core for all of them is that it's a service that's dedicated for a single client. It's a single tenant environment. And beyond that, we get into the definitions of third-party managed, which still single tenant. It's not owned by the client. It's owned by the provider, an external firm, and delivered on a per consumption, per seat, whatever the pricing model is for the delivery of those services. So the client does not necessarily need to own and operate the infrastructure for it to qualify as private cloud. We also have the more traditional definition where a client is owning the assets. They are operating the cloud environment for the use of their own enterprise, but for the end users of that service, it has all the attributes of cloud. It's scalable, it's self-provisioning, it's a group of shared resources, but they are for the dedicated use of that client. So we'll get into a little bit more of that in terms of the flexibility that's enabled by private cloud, but really that's where we're starting from a definitional standpoint. In terms of TBR's research, we're really including excerpts from 3 different reports as part of today's presentation. The first is a private cloud adoption study, which looks at the customers that are actually implementing and using private cloud solutions, the types of workloads, behavior, use cases for that environment. And so that's the first report. The second, we have a managed private cloud and professional services benchmark, which looks at the business for largely SIs providing those managed private cloud services for their clients, as well as the professional services that are wrapped around them. And then the third benchmark, which we'll cover here today, is the cloud components benchmark. So that looks at the business in enabling cloud environments, both public and private. We'll put it in a private context for today's conversation. But the hardware infrastructure as well as software infrastructure that enables the providers of private cloud, either those service providers that are external to the end user or the large enterprises that are building and maintaining their own environments, the components, the core building blocks that they need to operate those cloud environments. So that's the third area of research that we're drawing from for today's presentation. And so as we get into kind of the overall perspective for private cloud that cuts across those reports, what we're seeing and anticipating going forward is that private cloud, for a number of reasons, is going to be something that enables this next wave of cloud solution delivery and adoption for customers. It started with a focus around the security gaps in terms of public cloud offerings, but I think it's evolved into something quite more where the ability to customize the different elements of the private cloud solution as you get into hybrid cloud, be able to aggregate that, but going beyond just the off-the-shelf public cloud solutions that have been the focal point for cloud adoption to date is really how we see private cloud at a high level coming in and having an impact on the ways that customers are both using the solutions today as well as their desired use of solutions going forward. So the first point for today is really that customization is going to be the driving force behind the next wave of cloud adoption, and that private cloud really plays a critical role in terms of enabling that. Secondly, as we look at that path forward, what's the thing that we see as that true most distinct barrier in terms of just enabling a very straightforward increase in adoption for private cloud solutions? And it's this skills barrier that for private cloud, much more so than the public cloud solutions, there's an IT component, whether you're owning it yourself or having a provider deliver it to you. There's a management, there's an integration, there's an overall increased level of complexity with private cloud than we saw with public cloud. So the ability to arm the consumers of these services with the skills to really best utilize them is the biggest barrier that we're seeing from our customer adoption research to date. And then lastly, we'll cover some of the different routes that we're seeing to leverage private cloud services to enable that customization layer that really takes it beyond just being a cloud service, gets it much more towards a solution and an outcome that's enabled for the ultimate customers of private cloud. So when we look at the overall market today, so this aggregates the different views in terms of both those managed environments as well as the components needed to build and manage them. We are looking at a rapidly maturing market that for public cloud, it took a longer time frame to get to a certain level of maturity, and that for private cloud, when you look at a $40 billion space this year, that acceleration has been quite rapid in the early days. A lot of it has come from filling gaps where public cloud left off, that for a lot of regions, workloads, customer types, public cloud wasn't a fit. The desire to achieve cloud-like solutions was still there, and the maturation in terms of both the ability to build your own environment as well as the increase of offerings from third-party providers has really enabled this initial wave of adoption growth. So going forward, some of the barriers that we think we're going to temper the growth and adoption rates going forward will be, we hit on a little bit on the skills already, but I think the other factor is going to be the growing accessibility of public cloud, that for a lot of the providers to date, it's been focused on a U.S. market. It hasn't been necessarily a global play. It hasn't been a play that's been differentiated by vertical and going into all industries equally. But you're seeing more community-focused clouds, more clouds that are targeted at previously unserved segments of the market. That even extends to a geographic expansion for the likes of AWS, IBM, even HP, becoming more building the ability to deliver public cloud services in regions that previously were underserved. So we think it's going to be a longer-term perspective in terms of really growing within those segments, but we do see it having an impact in terms of the types of workloads that may be moving to public cloud because they were previously accessible or available in certain segments. Some of the drivers, and we'll get into this a little bit more on the next slide, but the line of business involvement in terms of bringing more input, at least, from different stakeholders within the organization as customers look at really evolving to something that goes beyond just being a service, more of a solution, more of an outcome. That's going to be a critical driver of workloads to a private cloud environment. And then the other new emerging standard is, platforms like OpenStack. Can they provide some of the baseline in terms of the infrastructure, the platform, the best practices for delivering, building, and operating a private cloud environment could be a big enabler of growth over the longer term and offset some of those gaps in terms of the short-term skills. So to get a little bit more into this shift in terms of line of business involvement, how that role is changing and how that relates to private cloud in relation to the other public and hybrid shifts that we saw. So private cloud is different primarily not just from a technology perspective where it's a single tenant environment. There's different elements involved in terms of the performance, the security, but it's also a return to much more of a traditional IT-driven purchase method, that the shadow IT type dynamics for private cloud are much more limited than with the public cloud solutions. So although there's been a lot of coverage and concern among some providers in terms of how to cater to IT solutions and sell them to an audience that is much more of a line of business focused group of constituents rather than the traditional IT constituents, I think with private cloud this is less of an issue. And so for our research, when we went out and evaluated the dynamics in terms of who's involved in the evaluation, final decision, how does that process work? We found that for 70% of these decisions, IT is at least involved, if not controlling the overall decision and process. So I think with private cloud, certainly much more of a traditional type of purchasing, and so that's important in terms of how to cater to that line of business audience without alienating the folks that have been your purchasers for a long time and really still hold a lot of the control when it comes to these private cloud solutions as opposed to the public solutions. And then as we look at really how do you get beyond, so if the buyers are more focused on outcomes, LOB is more at least involved in that conversation, how do you get these solutions elevated to a point where it's not about an individual service or an individual application, really gets to where, at least from a messaging standpoint, the vendors want their customers to be, and certainly the customers, as they're able to achieve that, it's the way that they want to be thinking about IT investments going forward. It's focused on really what's enabled by it. And so we believe that although technologies like private cloud, even if they're at the application level, get you so far in terms of providing a single service, that there's this gap in terms of really aligning to that outcome, and that there's going to need to be this integration and aggregation layer in terms of bringing all the cloud services in, translating that and aggregating that back to what the actual business objective is, which is going to be dramatically different than what the IT solution might be. And that there's going to be a lot of different ways that private cloud can feed in and be translated from this service to a solution and outcome. Some of them have been around a long time. Systems integration, that's not a market that's going away. It's still going to be highly complex environments that these services are feeding into, so that's going to persist. Full-out managed services, having a provider come in and assist with the ongoing maintenance, optimization, fine-tuning of the different cloud services that are being consumed is going to persist. The new ones, I think, is really where you start to get into a different model for how to address the desire for consumers of cloud and private cloud specifically to tie more closely back to the outcomes that are desired. Those are going to be cloud orchestration services. We've already done research looking at the use of those with customers. In the large enterprise, we're seeing a majority of customers using some type of cloud orchestration services to assist with the best use, the integration of different cloud solutions together. The business process as a service, we think this is going to be delivered in a lot of different ways. You're seeing more packaged offerings targeting specific verticals, specific processes within those verticals. We think that's going to continue, all delivered from a private cloud back end due to the complexity of the solutions that are being built, as well as the sensitivity of the data involved for a lot of these core business processes. And then finally, cloud brokerage, which is similar to we think going to evolve to be similar to a business process as a service, but it'll be one that provides more flexibility for the customer to be involved in terms of integrating different components that address their specific business problem. But it all kind of centers on the same theme, having multiple cloud services that are managed, delivered together, and consumed more as an outcome rather than a single service. So that's all great. I think we see that's the roadmap where private cloud is going to fit into this overall shift in terms of purchasing, different involvement from line of business, the focus less on the IT solutions themselves, more on the outcomes, which I think for private cloud is something that's uniquely enabled for more different sets of customers, different workloads than we saw with the public environments. As we get into what the biggest barrier is, we really see, as you look at private cloud, which is not this shadow IT type purchasing, this gap between the essential characteristics of cloud, which, as we covered before, don't go away with a private cloud environment. In fact, it's just a different audience that is actually the consumer of those cloud-like attributes. Sometimes it may be their actual own organization that's owning and managing the delivery, but the experience is really what defines whether it's a cloud environment or not. So those characteristics are critical. And the gap in terms of the way that traditional corporate IT, the typical characteristics for those organizations where there's dedicated resource, there's incremental elasticity, there's lag time, if you will, in terms of scaling up or deploying new services, and that for a lot of customers, it really is an aggregate service. It's not something that's metered out to the specific level that needs to be there to define it as a cloud environment. So these barriers, and they come up as we have conversations with IT departments around private cloud adoption. So the integration security, I think, is something that's persistent among their concerns about or barriers to more widespread use and adoption of private cloud, as well as the ability to perform that chargeback feature, to be able to truly deliver on something that's both operated at scale but also metered down to the individual department level and the user level. Is something that for public cloud wasn't as apparent in terms of the consumption. With private cloud, it certainly is. The impact of that we've seen from the 2 adoption studies that we've done starting last year, updating it this year, when we looked at the types of workloads that customers wanted to move to private cloud, for 2014, within that bubble, they're very focused on apps. They're looking at things that tie back more directly to their line of business constituents, certainly getting pressure there, but I think also more desire to align with the business than we've seen from years past and studies past. And that when we went back out and refreshed that study in terms of the level of adoption they've achieved in 2014, we saw this gap, those skills, that line of business involvement. I think there's a lot of things that play in there, but certainly I think the ability to be confident in the delivery and management of those private cloud services is the biggest thing that drove more adoption on the infrastructure side at the lower levels of that the IT stack in terms of providing additional compute storage capacity for existing workloads, but not necessarily shifting entire applications to a private cloud environment. That's been the gap that we've seen show up in terms of the level of adoption so far in 2014. So that's the customer view. To look at it a little bit more from a market view, and this is where our cloud components benchmark ties into the overall conversation. So when we look at the demand for the building blocks of cloud and how that's changing over time, certainly a lot of that market was driven by the hardware infrastructure requirements for the public cloud providers. If you look at Salesforce, AWS, they've grown, continue to grow extremely rapidly, the high rates of growth. The size of the infrastructure needed to deliver that continues to expand. So you just have this continual cycle of requirements for scaling out that infrastructure. We see a leveling off of that initial build out for public as the growth rates for that market slow over time, as well as get more efficient in terms of the cost effectiveness for the delivery, and you can see that from the price cuts from vendors like AWS, Microsoft, and Google, that the actual revenue that's generated by their and the increase in the revenue that's needed to supply into those vendors is going to taper over time. For the private cloud components, so this is both the service providers as well as the enterprises, we see a gradual kind of cresting for the infrastructure, that they're not always operated efficiently with the initial pilots, but for a lot of customers they can get to a point of efficient operation and even looking at benchmarks for public cloud being on par or slightly less when you take out the profit component. So we see this transition in what's going to be driving the market for that infrastructure from the big public cloud providers over to that private side as frankly more providers present themselves, as more second-tier service providers begin to scale their cloud delivery, as more enterprises have the tools to build out their own private cloud environments. That's what's going to be the driver of growth going forward for the overall market, rather than the scale-out infrastructure within the public cloud side. So another view at the overall market and kind of this dynamic for the second tier of private cloud providers, because we think this is going to be an important space. If you look at any of the large infrastructure providers and as well as the cloud providers themselves, enabling a second tier of regional cloud hosters, there's going to be a lot of different business models, whether you're looking at a VAR, a regional SI, telco, to enable them to deliver cloud services that are more focused either regionally, vertically, really gets more into that customization layer that's going to be enabled by not the biggest providers, but by a network of providers on a more regional basis. And so when we look at the cloud components market and what the drivers of growth are going to be, we already talked a little bit about from an overall delivery perspective, that private's going to be more important for the growth going forward in this space. But when we look at what components are going to be of the stack are going to be the ones that drive the growth, it's not so much in that core infrastructure hardware layer. We're seeing more growth opportunities shifting to operations management, delivery, security. Those are all things that, as we relate it back to skills, they're not all going to be, training opportunities or that type of service opportunity. A lot of it, we believe, is going to be hardened into the tools and platforms for those providers to operate and run the cloud environments. So we're going to see more focus on tools that not only allow enterprises to build it internally, but also service providers to operate their environment, but also manage the business end of becoming a cloud provider, which is something that they're not proficient in today. They know how to run data centers, perhaps, but they don't know how to run a cloud delivery business from a metering, billing, chargeback, orchestration type level, which is really a requirement for being successful in the space, and that a lot of the public cloud providers have, not perfected, but really optimized over the last 5 years. They're going to need to get up to speed much more quickly, and so those middleware layers of software are going to be the tools which allow them to do that. So the last topic for today is to look at some of the different routes. So we talked about customization, some of the ways that customers need to overcome skills, whether they're delivering private cloud internally or operating it as a business externally. So the first way that we see the market aligning to this need to customize the services but also overcome some of the skills gap is to consume a managed cloud service rather than building your own environment. So we have some of the quotes around the delay in terms of the value extraction from the IT investments in private cloud, that doing it much more, the speed to value is something that for the managed private environments, I think certainly today remains very compelling. We're seeing a majority of customers go that route for their initial private cloud deployments. So we see this as a market that continues to grow and expand for a lot of different reasons. It's driven by the ability to have the ability to customize, have a service that meets different internal process standards as well as external compliance standards, and overall have more control on the outcome from that service rather than consuming an off-the-shelf public cloud service. The next way that we see customers balancing the desire to customize some of the solutions, particularly for the more core applications, but still get the benefits of private cloud, is shifting investment up the stack to the core applications rather than having core compute infrastructure. It's driven a lot of the private cloud adoption that we've seen to date. But certainly there's that desire to get beyond that, to really look more holistically at the applications and services that are being delivered. So the types of workloads that are going to be consumed is another one of those shifts in the market that we see aligned around outcomes, but the ability to not take an off-the-shelf public cloud application, the ability to have some level of control, insight, visibility into the delivery of it. And so we see this next wave of private cloud-enabled applications as being one of the growth areas going forward. The last way in which customization is going to be delivered, and I think this might be the largest opportunity in terms of from a market perspective, not just for the providing vendors, but also enrolling a network of partners in terms of delivering on the actual outcome and solution. And that's adding above and beyond the services themselves, performing an integration layer as well as an aggregation and a brokerage layer. So the cloud complexity is something that goes beyond the individual services that is really a requirement to get, from a customer perspective, get their hands around in terms of the whole life cycle for cloud solutions. So we see segments of this involved in cloud marketplaces. And we've seen, in addition to some of the, like the Salesforce environment, we think IBM's Bluemix is an important stake in the ground in terms of providing that marketplace. The next evolution that we see is leveraging that involvement in terms of the upfront purchase and selection cycle to integrate and optimize and then customize either with services or modules that relate to specific business models or verticals, so that it really does pull multiple different cloud services together into something that's more consumable for the customers, which is ultimately one of the barriers that we see for cloud overall, is the difficulty in terms of the growing complexity of the cloud environment, the need to simplify the management and the consumption of those services in something that's more applicable to a broader segment of the population. So I think for, across cloud overall, those are the trends that we're seeing from a private cloud perspective. We think that it's going to continue to grow going forward, although not at the same rate, and that all these barriers in terms of getting to something that is both customizable as well as manageable from a back-end and ongoing perspective are the key pain points in terms of what's actually going to enable a broader set of customers to go forward with a private environment. Because although the size of the market is quite large when you compare it to the public cloud space, that for this to grow in a broader set of the population, not just be a large enterprise play in terms of building their own environments and consuming them, all of these kind of aggregation and customization layers need to be built in so that it's not just a raw service. It really gets to that outcome-based focus, which we see more and more customers looking at as they evaluate different IT solutions. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Allison, and I think we had a couple questions come in during the presentation.
We do. I think one probably, well, the first question, Alan, was, does TBR have market size estimates for cloud delivered through the 5 delivery models?
The 5 delivery models. So we do, I'm just thinking about the 5 delivery models. So we do look at the self-built private cloud separately with the component space. We look at the managed private cloud market. We look at the public cloud market. I think that's 3. We look at the opportunity in terms of where we're at today with hybrid, is we look at the level of investment to integrate and orchestrate cloud environments together. The next step for that is for us to look at the influence of hybrid in terms of that integration on the consumption of public and private. That's not something that we have today, but it's something that we're building towards. And then I think the 5th one would be the cloud professional services market. And we do look at that and size that as part of that managed private cloud and professional services benchmark.
And just in terms of the professional services, for those of you who weren't on the webinar yesterday, we did do the professional cloud services webinar, and that is on our YouTube channel. So if you missed that and want to go back and watch that, you can download the slides on SlideShare as well as watch that webinar on YouTube. The next one was more about comment, and I want to get your perspective on it. So the comment came in, so your assertion is that a business process or application as a service a la Salesforce or O365 is still a private cloud, or does that converge into public hybrid based on your definition?
So when we look at, like, Salesforce.com is probably the cleanest example to use. So we do consider that a public cloud. It's delivered through a multi-tenant backend, and so that's why we don't include it in the private cloud side. I think we were probably looking at that orchestration slide, which for example purposes we did include a public cloud service, because I think it goes beyond some of the impacts for private cloud. I think are going to come from that ability to integrate and optimize for a hybrid environment. So we do see an impact, but we do have a pretty clean break in terms of what's a public environment and what's a private environment.
Okay, and I think this one is more of a definitional thing. You had mentioned ODMs, and the question was, what is an ODM, enabled DCs?
So for the ODM, what is ODM? So that's a original design manufacturer. So those are the non-OEM providers of infrastructure. So our hardware team goes into the difference between for cloud components today, and I think this is one of the ways that the shift in terms of public versus private has an impact, is, so obviously for the big public cloud providers, ODMs are a big supplier of their infrastructure. They're not going with the branded OEM providers of those building blocks. We have done studies, and I think we're seeing more consideration from enterprises for ODM hardware as it relates to cloud adoption. So that's kind of what they are and how we see them having an impact on particularly the cloud component space.
Next question is, what is the main impact to Envision on the ADM segment with the maturity of private cloud apps?
So when we look at the ADM segment, so we're looking at it from a cloud professional services area. We see this as an area of increasing importance going forward as customers look to consume more private cloud platforms, to transition some more core business apps, which is really the desire that we saw among customers that were part of the survey, to get beyond the infrastructure, really start to move more both applications as well as business process over to a private cloud environment. So the involvement of SIs in terms of providing development and maintenance and management support for that customization layer is one of the areas of growth that we see going forward. And it's kind of a transition for the services side to go from a lot of workshop type road mapping discussions around cloud a number of years ago. We're seeing more focus on the ongoing management, customization layers of their offerings in terms of how to help customers today with cloud. So I think it's been an overall maturity curve in terms of the services that are most relevant for customers as the shifts in technology have happened.
Okay, I think this is a research-specific question. Do you have data on the commercial side versus public sector?
So for the commercial side versus public sector, some of the ways that we research, because when we think about the customization and the shift from broad homogeneous clouds to something that's more germane for a specific vertical or region, certainly the public sector is part of that. We do segment our adoption research by vertical. Public sector is one of them. And then we also cover, we're covering from the provider side and the public and the private side initiatives around the gov cloud type offerings that target just that specific vertical. So we're seeing activity from the public cloud side, privatization. You could call it, in fact, a community cloud, which has been part of the cloud definitions, which we haven't seen much activity around so far. But we think, and I think government is one of those first industries that you could look at in addition to healthcare and financial services, where you're starting to see more examples of a community cloud that could be either multi-tenant or single-tenant, but addresses a single vertical. So we are seeing more activity there in terms of addressing the public sector. I know that my peers on the that focus exclusively on that area still see a lot of persistent slow adoption in terms of transitioning to cloud services, but we are seeing more from at least from an offering side. I think it'll take longer for the adoption to really increase from the customer side.
Okay, we have a couple more questions in queue, so if there are any extra questions, please send them through now. We actually have a follow-up question, Alan. It is, who are you seeing as leaders in your definition of the private cloud space? And over time, as public and hybrid gains acceptance from the enterprise, do you envision a mass consolidation and or depletion of these providers?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the leaders for the private cloud space, I think pretty clearly if you look at where the market is today, a lot of the infrastructure providers are, from a revenue standpoint, leaders purely, somewhat because of their portfolio, and it's just not a huge market in terms of the providers of some of the core building blocks that are critical for the private cloud space. So HP, IBM on the infrastructure side, Cisco has a big play there. Those are some of the leaders from that perspective. In terms of the private cloud delivery and solution side, we kind of see a mixed market. We see IBM, some of the large SIs having a play there, but I think that the biggest evolution that we're expecting for the private cloud provider space is going to be this shift to a two-tier delivery model, where we think that the leaders, probably a VMware, a Microsoft is well positioned in terms of being an enabler of a network of private cloud providers that are based on their platform, but it's delivered through that network of partners, is going to be a powerful model and one that shapes the true kind of long-term leaders. It's not just going to be delivering the services yourself. It's going to be the most effective players in terms of enabling a network of private cloud providers to be on the front lines in terms of operating and delivering services to customers.
Okay. We have time for one more question. To what degree do you see private cloud growing? Will it eventually be 50% of my data center, and what's stopping it from going to be 100%?
So in terms of how far private cloud will go, in terms of the percentage of overall IT spend and percentage of the data center, so I would agree with the 50% ballpark. I think that it is going to be a sizable portion of enterprise data center platforming, as well as the managed models. I think will remain important as that shift from CapEx to OpEx. I don't think goes away. So for that reason, it'll always be a big part of it. But I think also that when you look at what's going to inhibit the additional growth of private cloud, will it be 100%? No, I don't think it'll be 100%. I think that the private cloud has a number of attributes that are attractive for the consumers and the end users of the solutions, but that for some use cases, some applications, you don't necessarily need to be able to provision on demand, to have users have that level of insight and control over the use of IT resources. It's okay to have some things that are standard and core. They're there. They need to be reliable, but you don't necessarily need to have all of the attributes of cloud. So those are unnecessary investments in terms of the benefit is not perceived and delivered through to the end customer.
We have one more question come through, so those of you who want to hang around for a couple minutes, I'm going to pawn this off to Alan real quick. Do you believe that traditional telcos, AT&T, Verizon, etc., can dominate this space if they shift focus from trying to replicate the Amazon model and instead focus on cloud connection federation?
So I think the telcos play a key role here. I think a lot of the competitive dynamics that we see is how do you take what you do today and translate it to a cloud model. So being a telco, the network, the connection to service quality and delivery, those are all things that I think are important, that have value for customers, that can lend itself to cloud delivery. But I don't think that they're necessarily going to overtake some of the traditional IT providers that have been much more focused around with services and support, around really enabling customers to get the benefits of the investments, whether they're traditional or cloud. And I think it also gets back to, we don't see the whole market going to a private cloud environment. So while the telcos may be able to carve out some additional space in terms of delivering and supporting private clouds, they're not going to necessarily transition over into the traditional IT space, which doesn't go away, doesn't it retains value over time. So I think that's the dynamic that kind of prevents the telcos of the world from overtaking the IT market, leveraging cloud and private cloud as a means to do that.
So we do have additional questions in queue, but we're out of time, so we're going to follow up with people offline. So with that, I'm going to sort of wrap up the webinar. So I want to thank you, Alan. Thanks everyone that attended today. Several of you have asked about the slides. We are going to be sending those out, and as an added bonus, we have just released our latest cloud infographic. So we'll be attaching that as well. That talks about a lot of what's happening across all of our cloud portfolio in terms of research findings. So you'll be getting that as well. As I mentioned, I want to share all the social media links with you. So I encourage you to follow both Alan and TBR on Twitter, as well as our TBR Cloud handle, which is just @TBR Cloud, where we're putting out cloud-specific research insights on that handle. You can also join our conversations on SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn to see this presentation or any other cloud presentations that we have. On your way out of the presentation, there are a quick survey, 3 questions: how valuable was the presentation, how good was the presenter, and if there's any other open-ended feedback. This feedback is really important to us. We do take it very seriously to improve our presentations. We realize you guys are busy, and if you're going to spend an hour with us, we want to make sure that we are answering all your needs and bringing value to the table. So if there are things that we could be doing better, things that you liked, please do let us know, because we will change our presentations to meet those comments from quarter to quarter. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another couple of minutes in case there's any last-minute follow-up questions or anyone would like to set up a private conversation with Alan based on the research that we're doing in cloud. And if we don't hear from you now, we'll be doing more cloud webinars coming in September into the next quarter. So keep an eye out for the invitations as well as the press release containing the list of all the webinars we'll be doing in Q3 of this year. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your summer, and we look forward to speaking with you all again soon. Thank you.